Morgan Rielly has his hearing set for today. Is there a Toronto tax when it comes to suspensions? Sheldon Keefe seems to think so. We'll talk about that and tee up tonight's Leafs and Blues game, all on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Got a game tonight between the Maple Leafs and the St. Louis Blues, so possibly you could throw your first $5 wager down there and hopefully win and get that bonus money. We will tee up that game in just a moment. What we do know about that one, though, is Morgan Rielly will be absent and will not be in the lineup for a few games here at the very least. His hearing is set for later today in New York City. Toronto reportedly, they're sending a strong contingent of people with Rielly up to New York to try and persuade the Department of Player Safety to make sure that it's not a 6-game suspension, which is kind of what's being reported based on the fact that it is an in-person hearing. I thought that yesterday there were some really interesting reactions at practice when it came to what the Maple Leafs players and coaching staff had to say about the whole Morgan Rielly situation. What did you make of those comments, Dave?
Well, I think, part of it was right from Sheldon Keefe in that the reaction from this got heightened because it's a Toronto. It's the Leafs. Like, it doesn't get blown up like we said this on the show yesterday. It doesn't go to this level if the Leafs aren't involved. Like, you see the storm on social media. Everyone wants a piece of the Leafs.
Yeah.
We've seen it. We've been tagged in a lot of stuff, namely from another podcast that's like to come at us, which all in good fun. I get it. But that's just the nature of it. Now, do I think Sheldon Keefe maybe push the agenda a little bit too much and to say that Toronto gets targeted in a specific way? I mean, it's tough. Like, the last suspension that's happened was Jason Spezza. It's not like the Leafs are constantly being targeted by player safety. But I will say, yes, there is a Toronto bias. There has always been a Toronto bias because we're seeing it. We live it every day.
I don't necessarily think that it's like, they're seeking out suspensions to hand out to the Maple Leafs. But what I think is interesting is when a suspension is levied on Toronto, it does seem to be a little bit more impactful than other suspensions around the league. And I think that's maybe what Sheldon Keefe was alluding to. It's not that, they're out here picking guys off and suspending them left, right, and center. But when something happens, it's like, gotcha. Y'all messed up. We're going to throw the book at you now. Like, we saw the Jason Spezza suspension. That was 6 games. I don't think anyone expected to see that come in as a 6-game suspension. It ultimately got reduced down to 4 with an independent arbitrator once it got appealed. So that just goes to show that the Department of Player Safety was a little too strong with their, when they came down with a 6-gamer to Spezza. And then also, Austin Matthews, I recall when he got the 2-game suspension for the cross-check on Rasmus Dahlin, there was some who thought probably should have just been a 1-gamer. The fact that he got a 2nd game felt like a little bit of a Toronto tax. And now here we are. And, we've seen tons. And like you said, lots of people are tagging us and tagging everybody, with similar suspensions or similar plays that have had lesser suspensions that were not in-person hearings, that were just a game or two. And now all of a sudden it happens to a Toronto Maple Leaf and it's an in-person hearing. And look, I said this yesterday. I believed at the time that it probably was a 2-game suspension. That's usually what a cross check to the mouth has garnered in the past. He is not a repeat offender, and he's a good, model citizen of the game ultimately. So I didn't think that they would throw the book at him. Now with the in-person hearing, it suggests that they're looking into 5, 6, 7 games in that range, which again is a little absurd if you ask me. However, what will make me somewhat okay with it, because again, I do want to also reiterate that, and I'll speak for you because I know that you've said this too. What Rielly did is not necessarily okay. Like
Mhm.
we like the reaction to the slap shot, but every reaction has consequence. And it was basically a cost benefit analysis. It was a risk analysis. And he thought, yeah, it's worth risking a couple of games to make sure that my team, doesn't get messed around with going forward. And, I'm okay with that decision. But what he did ultimately still does deserve some sort of suspension. But again, not that many, not 6, 7 games. That's just still outrageous to me.
Well, I think the other thing that did Morgan Rielly really intend to hit him in the face? Like, that's the other thing too.
Well, it
He-
depends who you ask. Are you asking someone who's a Maple Leafs or a Rielly
yeah,
supporter, or an anti-Rielly, anti-Maple Leaf? Because if you ask someone who is not in support of this, they'll say no way. He aimed and went face first. And if you ask someone who believes that, Rielly did the right thing sticking up for himself and his team, they usually come back with, well, Ridley Gregg, it kind of rolled up the shoulder. Gregg extended his arm and Rielly had to ride up it, and it just happened to get him in the jaw. So it depends who you're talking to. I'd be curious, based on the in-person suspension, I would imagine the Department of Player Safety deemed him to be aiming at for the face as the
yeah.
original point of contact.
It'll be easy for the Department of Player Safety to do that because that's what ended up happening, right? Like, it'll
Yeah.
be hard for Rielly to say, "Well, I didn't intend to hit him there," and then Department of Player Safety, "Well, you did," right? Like,
Right.
I like we know that what Rielly was trying to do. I don't think anyone's hiding from that. I think what's bothering me about all this is that people seem to think that Morgan Rielly, like, this is something Morgan Rielly would always do. Like, no, Morgan Rielly does not have a history of this. He's not a retaliatory player. He doesn't generally do things like this. He's willing to drop the gloves if he has to, right?
Yeah.
He's willing to stand. We saw it before. I think like Nick Robertson got hit. Morgan Rielly got a hit against the Jets, and Morgan Rielly dropped the gloves and went
Yep.
after the guy. This is
Yep.
not something he usually will drop the gloves. So it's not like this is a player who isn't willing to stick up and drop the gloves. He will do it, and personally, that's what I wish he would have done in this
Yeah.
situation. But you know what? The moment got to him, and now we have to see if the NHL player safety will assess this in a way that they. And I think the issue that Sheldon Keefe has in all this is he feels like Morgan Rielly might be made an example of, where other cases may not get the same reaction.
And I mean, that's very unideal for the Maple Leafs. I mean, Morgan Rielly
Mhm.
is an exceptional player. He's having a great season, and he's the best blue liner that Toronto has on an already super thin blue line. Like he's the
Yeah.
only resemblance of what could be a top pair defenseman. So having him out of your lineup for 5 or 6 games, that's going to hurt Toronto. It's going to hurt him dealing. Even if they appeal it with an independent arbitrator, these usually take time. Like I was talking yesterday with David Alter, and he was saying that apparently that David Perron appeal process is still ongoing. So the only thing, like it's gonna, even if he does appeal, however many games he gets, that's how many games he's gonna miss. The appeal process is really just to get Rielly's game checks back. Like that's
Exactly.
really all that'll happen is he'll get a couple of bucks back in his pocket, but the Leafs won't get Rielly's body in those games again. And that's where, the Leafs obviously why they're sending a full court press out to New York City to defend their guy to make sure that, this doesn't become a lengthy suspension or a suspension that, he's made an example of. And I wonder too how much of the noise that Keefe is making and the Maple Leafs are making is to try and get ahead of it, and maybe, Department of Player Safety is like, okay, maybe we shouldn't go all out here. I don't know. It's conspiracy theory talk, obviously, but it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening with Morgan Rielly. But life after Rielly starts tonight. It starts tonight with the St. Louis Blues in action. Why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back, talk about who might be in, who might be out of the lineup tonight. A couple of the injured players could possibly be returning. And we got an update on Joseph Woll as well. So all that and more coming up on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's a $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NHL players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NHL. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. We're a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast. You can find us wherever you get your pods from, also up on YouTube. We do have new content coming out each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So subscribe to get that daily dose of Maple Leafs directly to you. Leafs in action tonight, taking on the St. Louis Blues. So the first game after the Morgan Rielly incident. So it's interesting. I'm curious, Dave, if you think, and this question was kind of posed on Overdrive yesterday, so I'll give a shout out to them for this topic, I suppose. But do you think this has a potential to also be somewhat of a galvanizing situation for this team, almost like a TSN turning point, I suppose, in the season for Toronto? Is that possible that they could rally around this play and band together in Rielly's absence and start getting it going this season and rattle off a bunch of solid performances?
Well, and look at why people really liked what Morgan Rielly did, because this Leafs team has been, like, I wouldn't say lifeless, but it's just like, it feels like something needs to happen for this team to get its act in gear. And maybe, having a player do this, and we know that Morgan Rielly is very much an emotional leader for this team. He does mean a lot to this team. Sorry. I do think it is a moment that they can really say, all right, we need to get our what together. Like, our play has been unacceptable. We just lost to another team that's not in the playoffs. Also really low in the playoffs. Just want to remind people that like, this isn't an Ottawa Senators team in the bubble, right? The Leafs have been doing this far too much. They need to start, like, if they want to cement themselves as a playoff team, they need to go on a run here. Like, and now they're gonna have to do it without Morgan Rielly, and that's no easy feat. And they don't have a really tough schedule, but they do have some tough teams. Like, St. Louis is not a team you take lightly.
No.
Maybe early in the year you think so.
They've won 7 of the last 8 games. They're winning hockey games right now.
Yeah. So you got a pretty decent Blues team. The Flyers, who have been, hot and cold this year. Like, this, you can't say there's an easy stretch. People are saying, oh, they got some easy games coming up. I'm sorry. With this Leafs team, there are no easy games. It has not been proven. And it's time that this team
twice to Chicago this year.
Yeah. Like, it's time for this Leafs team to get its act together and start showing whether they want to be, a contender. This Rielly situation, to me, and even I even listened to Kipper and Bourne yesterday. Like, Kipper saying, this wasn't just about what Ridley Gregg did. This is about the situation that the Leafs are in right now. And I think Morgan Rielly's letting some frustration out. And I would wish more players. You saw Connor McDavid against the Kings the other day, like breaking his stick because the Oilers, after coming off a historic 16-game winning streak, were losing to the LA Kings, who have been in free fall. Yeah. That, to me, that we haven't seen enough of that frustration from these players, and you need to see this team start playing a little bit more pissed off that things aren't going their way. Like, we need a little more jam from this team. So I'm hoping Rielly does what Rielly did, gets this team to understand that they need more. They need to give more.
Yeah. Let's take a look at what the projected lines are going to look like tonight. The blue line for the Maple Leafs without Morgan Rielly. So TGA Brody will now be paired with Timothy Liljegren, who moves up to the top line in place of Brody. Brody, I guess, will shift back over to the left side of the ice. Liljegren on the right. Benoit and McCabe stick there as the second pair together. And then looks like Mark Giordano is going to check back in after missing out on the game Saturday night. He gets back in with William Lagesson on the right. So Brody, Liljegren, Benoit, McCabe, Gio, and Lagesson. That doesn't look like a cup caliber blue line, if you ask me.
No, it just reminds us why this team has been searching for a defenseman all year.
Yeah.
And why they might be looking for more than one defenseman, because
that's correct.
You lose Morgan Rielly, and like Jake McCabe is going to be the power play one guy. Like, let me just talk about that. Let me just talk about that for a second. That Jake McCabe is going to handle an offensive role on the power play. Like,
that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No,
I mean, Giordano has manned PP2 in the past, so that would have been my first guess as to who would have taken over first power play duties. Then probably Timothy Liljegren, who in times has also played on the second unit power play. And then there's the option of just 5 forwards, a 5-forward power play.
Yeah,
I thought was also a possibility here with Morgan Rielly out. But no, I guess Jake McCabe ends up getting the first run practicing up with the first power play unit. So I'll be curious to see what Sheldon Keefe does if that does turn out to be what he wants to do. I wouldn't sleep on a 5-forward power play unit, though. I wouldn't sleep on that, Dave.
I would say this: if they struggle with it off the hop, like if it doesn't work, they will go to the 5 forward. The reason why I initially wasn't as surprised about Jake McCabe is because he's actually put up some offense this year, right? Yeah. He did go on a streak where he was putting up points, but again, I think Timothy Liljegren would have been the ideal one because you already played Jake McCabe a lot, and the reason why I didn't think Giordano is because you want to manage his ice time. That power play one spends a lot of time on the ice, right? Yeah. They don't come off.
They're not hard minutes, though. You know, like
it's not.
But yeah,
I thought Liljegren would have been good. I understand that he's had his struggles this year, but this maybe be a thing like we're going to give you some power play time. We're going to trust you with this responsibility. That's how I would have gone about it.
Yeah, and another thing, like remember at the beginning of the year, John Klingberg was supposed to help here, and well, we know what's going on there. Obviously, he is not of help to anyone anymore on this Maple Leafs team. Forward-wise, really no difference except looks like David Kampf was back at practice yesterday. He should be back in the game tonight, returning. He was back to his fourth line center roles, and it looks like Bobby McMahon might be missing out on the game, which means Ryan Reeves gets another shot. And so it'll be Reeves, Kampf, and Holmberg, Gregor, Domi, and Robertson, Bertuzzi, Tavares, and Nylander, and then Nyes, Matthews, and Marner makes up the top line. So that's your forward unit. Really quickly, too, I would assume Samsonov will get the start, but Joseph Woll was at practice yesterday, and Joseph Woll participated in the full practice, interestingly, and they opted to let Martin Jones kind of take a little bit of time off after the loss in Ottawa. So Joseph Woll possibly close to returning, not going to play this week, I don't believe, but him taking part in his first full practice is definitely a good sign to him being on the road to recovery. And we'll probably see him in action sometime soon. I think I had heard potentially they're aiming towards the end of the month, so maybe another week and a half or 2 weeks. Maybe gets a game or two in the minors to condition himself before getting back up with the Maple Leafs, just because they can do that on a emergency conditioning basis. But we'll see. But a good sign to see Joseph Woll taking part in a full practice. Hopefully he's feeling good this morning after doing so.
Yeah, I think I know that initially I think Keefe had said mid February is where they were looking at. I do think maybe like it's his first full practice. I think they want to see how he responds to it and then give him a few more practice. I think also when you look at how this season has kind of gone for goaltending, like you just can't take a chance that you rush him back early because
No.
Martin Jones did admirably when he stepped in, but I don't know if the last start against Ottawa wasn't at sharp. I would say. I mean, he did have quite a bit of time off, so I think that played a bit of a factor. But yeah,
it's been a few games now in a row. Like they ran him into the ground. They just literally ran him into the ground. It's crazy. But either way, I think I think Joseph Woll hopefully can return and get going and pick up where he left off. All right, let's take one more quick break. We'll come back and we'll kind of dig into tonight's matchup, Leafs and Blues. We'll do that on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. It's almost the halfway point in the season, Leaf fans. And regardless of where we are in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid or Matthews or William Nylander, Crosby, McKinnon, whoever will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in any given game. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Leaf fans. You can win 100 times your money by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. Maple Leafs back in action tonight. They return home to take on the St. Louis Blues, the suddenly surging St. Louis Blues too, who've won 7 of their last 8 games. They've won 2 games in a row here coming out of the All-Star break, both of which on this road trip that they're currently on. It's going to be a test tonight for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, like a few months ago, we were talking about a St. Louis Blues team that was in the mud. They fired their coach.
Yeah,
right. They had the worst power play in the league, like one of the worst power plays in the league, and now they're in a wild card spot.
And the power play has actually been pretty good the last little bit too.
Yeah, so that's a team. I like the Blues are always such a tough team to play against. Leafs have had their struggles against them, so like. They can't take this team lightly. They got a lot going for them. I can't pinpoint what exactly. Like it just feels like the Blues team is playing with a lot more confidence.
Yeah, well, I think that's what it like. This is a good squad, right? A good Blue squad. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't working earlier under Craig Berube. But you noted the power play. I'm just looking now. They've got 8 power play goals in their last 6 games. So Toronto, special teams is going to be a big factor tonight. I think the penalty kill is going to have to come up big. So hopefully, they can do that. That's going to be, I suppose, one of the keys to victory tonight is to make sure that they can, win the special teams battle. Because I think that's going to be huge in a game like tonight. What are some other keys to victory for Toronto, you think?
I think the physical play is going to be essential, right? Like this is a There's a Blues team that likes to get scrappy. They like to play with that physical edge. And, you're keeping, we talk about Ryan Reeves staying in the lineup. There's probably a reason why he's staying in the lineup. They got some heavy players, some guys that are willing to get down and dirty. So I think, you're going to have to match that in a way. I think you can't shy away from it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And especially coming off the situation, the slap shot gate with Ridley Gregg and Morgan Rielly showing some emotion. You better hope that everyone else kind of shows a little bit of emotion tonight and displays a little bit of physicality, just to show, hey, we're not going to get messed around with. All right, that's over with. That's done. And St. Louis, they're going to try. They're going to make that attempt, but Toronto's going to have to definitely answer the bell, which is probably why they got Ryan Reeves out there, realistically, just in case, some funny business goes down or they try and get a little too physical with the big boys. Hopefully Ryan Reeves can do what he's supposed to do and negate that from happening. For me, another kind of key that I'm looking at tonight is, I think the Maple Leafs do a good job generating scoring chances within the slot area. They're one of the better teams at doing so. And I was taking a look, and the St. Louis Blues at 5-on-5 actually give up the third most high danger chances this season. So if they can just keep at it, get to the middle of the ice, guys like Tavares, guys like Matthews, that's where those dudes kind of live and make their money. I think they need to continue to do that tonight. Go to those key areas and put pucks on net. Should be able to find the back of the goal if they do so. What do you think? You think that the Leafs can get it done tonight against the Blues? How do you see this one shaping out?
I think it's gonna be a close one. I do think that hopefully a more energized Leafs team. The thing is, Leafs have played so meh at home. Like their last home game was good against the Stars, right? They did play well against a team that was on a pretty good roll.
No Rielly,
but tonight. No Rielly. I don't. Yeah, it's just I don't know what the response is going to be like. The Blues are coming in hot. They're coming in confident. Like you look at those young guys between Neighbors, Kyrou, Thomas. Like that's some good young players playing. Like, and it's a deep lineup too for the Blues. So
yep.
I think it's going to be a close one. I just think the Leafs again. It's going to come down to can those big boys step up and pitch in to help this blue line. It's not going to be just up to the blue line to kind of hold the fort with Rielly out.
100%. 5-man unit. It's got to be a 5-man unit back there. Actually, I saw a very interesting stat about Morgan Rielly. The last 2 years when Morgan Rielly was injured and out of the lineup, the Leafs were 15-2-1. That seems absurd.
Well, and remember all that time that Rielly missed last year, right?
Yeah, they went on that hot run. I know
they went on that hot run. They had with him and without TJ Brody. Now, you want to know what the Leafs record is all time without Morgan Rielly? Morgan Rielly throughout his career has missed 63 games. The Leafs are 38, 18, and 7.
Yeah.
I'm looking here. I'm trying to see if and they've allowed, I don't know what the goals against average was, but they've scored more goals than they have allowed in that period. Let's just say 208 goals scored, 168 games. There's always I remember last year.
You're telling me, Dave, that they've have double the amount of wins than losses.
Yeah.
And somehow have scored more than against.
Yeah. Well, it's also like it's a high number of for and against. It's not like they barely are etching out wins. But I remember there was a bit of that conversation last year of, do the Leafs really need Morgan Rielly? That started happening last year, remember? Is this Leafs better off without? The Discord was popping off about that.
Yeah.
I still think you need a Morgan Rielly. You still need quality, talented defensemen in your lineup.
Yeah, for me, the issue is up front. There was more defensively driven players, defensively minded players that could support. They had a good support system or a better support system in the bottom 6 there last season. Not necessarily the case this year, which is why I'm a little more concerned when it comes to an extended Rielly absence this time around than I did maybe a year ago. And Justin Hall was a player who stepped up big
I
in
was
that
literally
time
just
with
about to say,
Giordano.
Mike,
Yeah, with
just say it. Justin Hall. They don't have Justin. You know what?
but they got Benoit, but they do have Benoit, and like Benoit's
Dude.
kind of stepped up to kind of be like a
Yes.
Justin Hall replacement in a way. But Giordano played a big role in stepping up once because both Rielly and Brody were down for an extended period of time last year, and those two had to step up and play an elevated role, and they did that really, really well. Gio's has not been able to step up this year and play that way. Liljegren at times stepped up and played a top 4 role. Has
Him and
not quite
Sandin
done that.
last year. That was kind of their calling card. They were so good as a pair last year.
Yeah.
When those guys were out, and well, you don't have Sandin anymore, and Liljegren's taking a step back.
Yeah, and Brody's taking a step back. So
You're
going to need these guys to play above their weight a little bit, and you're going to need that buy-in up front from the forwards, all of them, not just the bottom 6, but you need Matthews, you're going to need Marner, you're going to need Nylander, Bertuzzi, Tavares, all of them going to have to back check and play as a unit, and play tight, quick passes, quick outlets, the stretch passing, probably not going to see a whole lot of that. You're going to want to see 5 guys below the faceoff dots most of the time. So that's what I would anticipate tonight to combat the loss of Morgan Rielly and try and get it done for the Maple Leafs and help out Ilya Samsonov a little bit in this game. We'll see. Should be an interesting one. Either way, I think it'll be a good game between the Leafs and the Blues down at Scotiabank Arena, 7 o'clock puck drop. That will do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs show on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back for another episode for you guys tomorrow. We'll recap the game. Go Leafs, go. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.